The Daily Star on Saturday, the 19th of September 2020, on page 6, not 6th of September, but 19th of September, at page 6, is running a headline that is absolutely historic. It is concerned about the truth. The Daily Star, the tabloid, one of the worst kind of specimens of press freedom or free press, is talking about the inability to say the truth in the highest officers in the Houses of Parliament. And it's calling it, there is a new pandemic, mini pandemic, that seems to be confined to the highest officers in the Houses of Parliament. Symptoms include incompetence, confusion, hypocrisy, and the uncanny knack of bouncing from one crisis to another. This is not a description of the Houses of Parliament. It's a description of the government. Parliament, of course, is complicit, and members of both the houses, so-called, are complicit, but the accusation of lying and hypocrisy and bouncing from one crisis to another applies most immediately against the behavior of the Johnson-fronted cabal. The most common sign displayed by sufferers is the stubborn inability to ever admit when they are wrong. Now, by sufferers, it is referring to the sufferers of the mini pandemic. The latest government chief to fall victim is Dido Harding. Well, that is more like it. But Dido is the overly overpaid conservative conwoman who was promoted by Call Me Dave Cameron, who brought on the disaster of Brexit. And he was apparently contemporary, whether they attended the same college or not, but he was a contemporary at, quote, Oxford. Frightening name. I mean, terrifies the rest of society with that name. That is the Oxbridge tie, or the connection, is the most poisonous tie in this country, Oxbridge and the Eton and that kind of thing. And there is no sign that the Labour Party is about to launch a manifesto commitment to undo the damage that Oxbridge and Eton and their kind of followers do cause to the body politic and society, and to the cause of the truth, talking about the Daily Star saying about the truth. Now, Dido Harding is the unfortunate soul put in charge of the government's so-called world-beating test and trace system. Based on the results we have seen, they clearly weren't talking about our world. People with COVID symptoms are spending days on end trying to book tests online. Others are being told they have to travel hundreds of miles to get tested. And thousands of families are isolating because their child has a cold, but they can't prove it's not COVID-19. Baroness Harding lost no time in finding others to blame. She said no one saw the rise in demand coming, clearly forgetting that term starts in September every year. Then she blamed schools who were told by the government to reopen, saying they hadn't done enough to prepare. She may just as well have put her fingers in her ears, closed her eyes, and stamped her feet. It's hard to respect someone who takes the paycheck without ever taking any of the responsibility. Now, this is a timid, very timid, and kind of sublime criticism by the Daily Star, and they won't dare do anything rigorous. But that is a symptom of the lack of credibility that the current cabal actually suffers itself. And Harvey Weinstein has been stripped of his CBE. Well, Weinstein may have been stripped of his CBE. That's safe. I mean, would that not be appropriate to strip Dido Harding of her place as the Baroness in the House of Peers? But they won't call for that. And Ozzy Osbourne is reported as saying that people think he's insane. And Sharon says he's fooling you all. And Putin has bought Uranus, is it? They're saying that Russia claims to own Venus and the US warns of an impending space war. Your peace-loving favorite paper are just keep your mitts off Uranus. That's the main headline. Is the main headline about Putin taking over Uranus and owning Uranus. And the rest of the Star is not reporting the actual, as I said yesterday, the kind of spread, the root of this spread, the causes of this spread, and the numbers of this spread. That's not what it is. Instead, it is a kind of slogan. It's against the lockdown, and it doesn't have any relationship with the reality. So the other headline in the editorial column is, of course, against Putin's Uranus for under 10 pounds. Is getting the spot on the Uranus too. So the Daily Star has landed a bargain, getting a spot on Uranus for under 10 pounds. So that kind of thing, but there is nothing really about the state of unpreparedness and the kind of lack of preparedness in the public health system and the public kind of providers of public service, so-called. And that is the symptomatic lack of engagement with the truth of the news that Fleet Street suffers from throughout the year. And that's one of the main reasons why the so-called authorities, the people in so-called government, are allowed to feel complacent and show no concern about preparing society for service. I mean, Sadiq Khan's warning yesterday about a new surge in the virus spreading in London is also vacuous and empty, because most of the evidence of the public transport system shows the laxity on the part of the public transport system, the London tube system, the buses, calling it bus service is an exaggeration because it is not a service. Half the times, the bus drivers ignore people standing at the bus stops, raising their hands and not stopping. And buses still come in numbers, and they keep people waiting for far longer at the bus stops than it says on the tin. So generally, the level of negligence and lack of care and engagement with the provision of service is as bad as it has been for decades. Note that. And the media, the Evening Standard, for example, the London Evening Standard is owned by the Two Beards. Two Beards is a tag given by the private eye to this Russian billionaire or son of the Russian billionaire, and a friend of Boris Johnson's, who is entertained more than once in the Italian spaces owned by the billionaire's son, billionaire. Now, the Evening Standard never attacks Sadiq Khan, who is the Labour Party card-carrying kind of mayor in post. And the Evening Standard is biologically a completely anti-Labour kind of outlet. And so it never attacks even Sadiq Khan on normal level of poor service and poor accountability. It only attacks Sadiq Khan when it wants to score a point rather than serving the readership, serving the people of London. Make that point. That is a different point. It does criticize Sadiq Khan or does criticize Labour Party card-carrying kind of occupants in posts, but it doesn't do that in order to serve the cause of democracy or public utilities, amenities, or public kind of ease of use or convenience of use or comfort or kind of high standard of use of these services by the public. It does that only when it wants to show up the Labour Party as the bad ones. So it's a kind of partisan agenda to condemn the party rather than to point out the level of service this party allied occupants in power and posts are offering. And that line runs across everything. Every media, every kind of organ that is in the mainstream, typified by the Fleet Street, is owned and controlled by people who are hostile to the ideas of a social society. And they therefore attract the people only to promote that interest, to maintain the agenda of the status quo of control of the means and the control of the access by the wrong ones. That is the right wing. And the right wing is not being said here as part of the kind of alternative to socialist. Right wing in itself is the wrong thing, irrespective of what comparison there is with the alternative party platform. Right wing in itself is the bad thing. It is against universality, against objective entitlements and needs. That's how we are using the term and concept of right wing, not as a comparison, as an alternative to the, quote, supposed left wing. Now, The Guardian, as we have been saying, has been under Catherine Weiner getting worse. I mean, the Guardian's agenda is supposed to have been, in the past historically, one that was supposedly an alternative to the right wing and the Daily Mail and the Sun and the Express and the Boris Graf and the Times. But The Guardian has got even worse in terms of the political kind of drift away from even that tokenistic position, since Alan Rabishar departed and was replaced by Catherine Benety. And here is the proof. They don't refer to Johnson. They kind of elevate him to, quote, PM. Notice the difference. The difference in their using of the word and use of the word kind of Johnson and PM. They don't use the word Johnson in the headlines. They call him PM. And that elevates him undeservedly, unwarrantedly, and factually unsustainably, evidentially unsustainably, because if he is called Johnson, then he is identifiable as the person that is doing the failing and neglecting and the disconnecting. But if they say PM, then it actually comes with a package that you have to defer to it, defer to the occupant, defer to the office. So the office that was discredited by Johnson, as the speech by Ed Miliband said. Ed Miliband was actually discrediting his office as well. That office, according to the Guardian, whose political sketch writer recognized that speech for what it was, and even despite that political sketch writer recognizing that, the Guardian is reverting to giving Boris Johnson the benefit of the association with the office of PM. Now, that's not justified. There is too much evidence of Boris Johnson failing the office, discrediting the office. And so, therefore, he should be identified as Boris Johnson, who is not fit for that office and is not delivering according to the objective standards of democracy, accountability, transparency, and legality and constitutionality, and ethics and morality. He is the breaker of the law. He is the inciter of the hatred against the rule of law, against the due process, against the obligations that come from universal acceptance of certain values and standards and agreements. So he says, new lockdown fears as PM warns second wave is here. Now, all the evidence shown throughout the whole of the last 3, 4, 5, 6 months points to the fact that Boris Johnson has been failing. And Boris Johnson has been out of touch, out of contact, and in denial. And yet they say that he is warning of second wave. That suggests not only that he is kind of in rightful occupation of the post of PM, but he is in rightful occupation of his mind, control of his mind and his senses. Contrary to the diagnosis that Ed Miliband represented in that speech on Monday. That he didn't know the facts, he didn't read the stuff, he doesn't know the stuff. That's what Ed Miliband said. So, but the Guardian is reinstating Johnson in the post of being in contact with the evidence and the facts and in possession of the knowledge, relevant knowledge of the relevant state of the virus and the state of the readiness to provide the cure or the care and the support needed by those affected and by those who are in need of being protected from being affected. And then they've got, of course, this is a kind of headline piece. I mean, ever since she was identified by 2 Americans as the sexiest barrister in Britain, Amal Alamuddin has become automatically a news item, whatever she says and whatever she does. And she has staged a timely exit from the role as so-called envoy, UK envoy, over the Brexit bill. And that is, in itself, that is all there is in that one. Because it's a news headline that Amal is actually craving and receiving. And there is a piece, very small piece next to it. Angela Rayner is talking about Boris Johnson needing to pay real living wage to 1 million care workers. But again, they are not calling him by name. They are not calling him Boris Johnson. They're calling him PM. So on the same headline, front page, two headlines given to promoting Boris Johnson as PM, not promoting his behavior, conduct, but the image of Boris Johnson as the PM. And typically the Guardian is doing typically trendy stuff, trendy things that Alan Ravishar introduced to Guardian readers. And it is admitting on page 4 that tougher restrictions leave 13.5 million people in the UK under local lockdowns. And they've got actually they're calling him Boris Johnson at the Jannah Institute of Research in Oxford University, where he is rarely seen wearing a mask. And there is a piece about the schools not being kept successfully open, as 4 out of 5 schools due to lack of tests. That's where the pupils are off in 4 out of 5 schools due to lack of tests. And they've got a picture of Dido Harding saying that stupid denial thing. I don't think anybody was expecting to see the really sizable increase in demand. There has been always warnings, there has been always the kind of awareness and talk and reference to the fact that the virus was not going. It was going to come back, and it was going to resurge, and it was going to spread again in larger numbers than was appearing to be the case. And then there is, of course, this is a helpful piece on pages 12 and 13, headlined How the Virus is Evolving. And they're talking about mutating. This virus is mutating. So that's the descriptive spread on pages 12 and 13 of The Guardian, which is a departure from the promotion of Johnson. And then this is the first time, and this is because the writer is former Lambeth Labour councillor Dan Sabag. Now, Dan Sabag is the one that actually, in April 2018, described Tower Hamlets mayor as the diminutive John Biggs. And I have since used that description many times because it actually fits the reality of John Biggs, his kind of physical stature, and also his diminishing role, diminution of the duty, and diminution of the London Borough of Tower Hamlets Council to a lower standard and lower level than it had already been. So Dan Sabag has got a record in our knowledge of getting some of the things, even though they're carried in The Guardian. He is now, since that time, I think he has been kind of promoted to a position kind of in the editorial letter. So he's saying that this based on the Spectator's front page. Where is Boris? Former Fraser Nelson on a government at sea. Now, Fraser Nelson, the editor of the Spectator, Fraser Nelson, the editor of the Spectator, is one of the kind of less poisonous, but as corruptly dedicated deniers of the truth in this country. And he is one of the kind of persistently in denial liars. But he doesn't lie like Trevor Kavanagh of the scum. Both of them Scottish, but both of them thoroughly anti-Scottish in their allegiances and in their collusions and their kind of peddling roles for the racist, English-centric kind of organs and agencies and interests. So he's saying that in the headline on the cover of the Spectator, they're running a kind of picture of the sea. And it says, where is Boris? And then the subheading says, Fraser Nelson is talking about Boris Johnson at the government at sea. And the Dan Sabah piece, based on that, because the Spectator has been absolutely, solidly in denial and pro-Brexit and pro-Boris Johnson and against Europe, against international agreement, charter, everything. But even the Spectator coming to the conclusion where its editor, who is a solid right-winger and a solid backer of Brexit denials, is now questioning Boris Johnson. Where is Boris? That is why Dan Savak has decided to run this piece or write this piece. And it says, right turn, conservative press begins to question Johnson's competence. So this is where they are remembering to call him Johnson, not on the front page, not on the two items on the front page. So they're saying, so Dan Savak is saying, where is Boris? Asked this week's Spectator, the weekly magazine the Prime Minister once edited, and from whom he might once have expected a better press. With a cover featuring a distant blonde dot on a tiny boat, bobbing rudderless and oarless on the stormy sea, the message of chaos and drift was emphatic, a criticism of Johnson's leadership in the battle against the pandemic that is being replicated across an increasingly skeptical right-wing media. The question now is whether he can become a proper leader with a sense of direction and purpose, asked the magazine's editor, Fraser Nelson, in effect arguing that Johnson's premiership was at a crossroads, coming after a week in which Britain's test and trace system, once intended by the Prime Minister to be world-beating, was at the point of collapse. Nelson asked whether the pattern we have seen in recent months of disorder, debacle, rebellion, U-turn, and confusion is what we should henceforth expect. And this is actually the Spectator published after that historic, unprecedented 2-minute performance and speech by Ed Miliband. I think Ed Miliband, has influenced this without any doubt, because that particular performance and speech making created rarely seen waves across the social media. And it focused people's attention on the total idiocy and dishonesty and unreliability and stupidity of the Boris Johnson fronted cabal. That is the thing that happened on Monday. And that is causing this kind of headline. The Spectator running this, where is Boris? Where is Boris headline on the front page, on the cover. Now, this is something that should have been published by the Sydney and Beatrice Webb related or founded New Statesman, but it isn't. So that shows even when the conservatives, right wingers, are having to admit the disaster that is the conservative Boris Johnson fronted cabal, the so called Labour affiliated, Labour supporting so called, it may not be always reliable because the New Statesman and the Guardian and others openly abandoned any affiliation with the Labour Party when fronted by Jeremy Corbyn. And they were absolutely wrong because they confused a number of things. They confused the role of the leadership as personified by Jeremy Corbyn with the role that the Labour Party or the opposition should be playing. And if it was failing to play the role, then the causes of that failure should have been identified and looked for and investigated. And the causes were mainly to be found on the Labour Party's remaining benches, who were betraying the cause of the Labour Party, the cause of the opposition, and they were betraying the country. Doesn't matter what their motivation was for hating Jeremy Corbyn. It doesn't matter at all because they were failing the main task. They were failing the main task. If Corbyn was failing to represent opposition to racism, which they confused as being the same as just anti-Semitism, then they should have made every effort to bridge the gap of information. And they should not have allowed the conservatives that big space which existed, which began to develop because of the collusion by most of the Labour Party MPs who were colluding with the agenda and the narrative of the anti-Labour Party kind of interests. And thus they were paving the way for the victory at the 12th of December 2019 election. On top of the role played, of course, by Jeremy Corbyn in that, as I have been saying consistently and demonstrably, evidentially. But the point is that the Labour Party MPs betrayed the Labour Party. Those who were and still are and have been still members of the Labour Party. And these people are unfit to be MPs. They won't be getting elected as MPs if they stood on any other ticket. That is the fact. So there are various defects in the stance taken by the so-called Labour Party supporters and organs. And that collection of treachery and lying and dishonesty and lack of commitment to the cause of serving democracy and serving the community is in focus. And we are continuing with this. So what is Dan Sabak saying? He's also referring to the personal comment by Fraser Nelson. The question now is whether he can become a proper leader and a sense of direction and purpose, with a sense of direction and purpose. And then he's, Dan Sabak is talking about the Daily Mail. Others in the same magazine, he's talking about the Spectator, put it more idiosyncratically. What on earth happened to the freedom-loving, twinkly-eyed, rebellious character I voted for? Oliver Hardy has left the stage, replaced by Oliver Cromwell, said the columnist Toby Young, complaining of a lack of engagement with the detail. Now, Toby Young is the son of a kind of Labour baron. Now, Toby Young is one of the nastiest, right-wing, racist, in denial idiots that have been in the crowd cheering Boris Johnson and Brexiteers and racists. And here is the same Toby Young saying that he was an idiot to vote for Boris Johnson and cheer for him. That is within less than the year since he voted in December. The right-wing tabloid highlighted Johnson's subdued performance the day before in front of Parliament's liaison committee, where he admitted that the short answer was that there were nowhere near enough COVID tests available. A week earlier, Johnson talked optimistically about a moonshot plan to test millions of people a day as a way to return to pre-coronavirus normality. Now he had humiliatingly been forced to admit there were nowhere enough tests at a level closer to 230,000 a day. Too often, the government has overpromised and underdelivered, concluded a leader in the center-right Times yesterday. Policies have had to be swiftly abandoned after the exposure of entirely predictable problems, among them the A levels and the contract tracing app. The paper, perhaps with an eye on a promotion for the former Times journalist Michael Gove, argued that Johnson needed to appoint competent deputies before the public come to settle an unflattering view about his ability to do the job. For all the criticism and failures, says Dan Sabag, the situation is not hopeless for Johnson. This is not Jan Sabag alone. This is Catherine Weiner. The Conservatives remain ahead in polls at just over 40%. The pollster Deborah Mattinson, the author of a new book, Beyond the Red Wall, that analyzes the Tories' seizure of Labour's strongholds in December's election, says, Red Wallers are more forgiving than you might expect. They have taken this big decision to leave Labour and are seeking to justify that. So that is the piece by Dan Sabak, which is moderated by Catherine Weiner. Definitely moderated by Catherine Weiner. And so the Guardian is not telling the whole truth because it is strangled by Catherine Weiner's own political affiliations and there is a piece on the environment. Wilderness the size of Mexico destroyed by humans over 13 years only. And there are two pages on the environment featuring a tiger and a picture of David Attenborough. And there is a piece in the prosecution of 5 men allegedly involved in toppling of slave trader Colston has been given warnings. And we are just looking at the time and this John Crace is talking about so-called Health Secretary Matt Hancock. And there is a picture of Michael Gove. And the caption to the picture of Michael Gove says that something about the Sasha Swire diaries, where this diary has been exposing intimate kind of so-called details that are mainly kind of related to sex and sexual kind of references that are not really political. That is what they main tabloids are running with. And there are 2 pages on Diana Rigg and her various tastes and preferences. And Marina Hyde is having a go at Matt Hancock about tests. And I got a piece by Jonathan Fraudland. The piece is headlined, "The Brexiteers' Ignorance is Steering Us to Disaster." Now, that is absolutely too late. The Brexiteers, the idea of Brexit that was unleashed by or brought to reality and given tangible kind of relevance by the so-called anti-Brexiteer, David Cameron, has been a disaster right from the beginning. And I got a piece on page 4 by Angela Rayner about care workers. So the Guardian is continuing its affiliation with the agenda of kind of peddling for the council employees, and to a significant extent the trade unions as well, similar to, not exactly identical, but similar to the agenda and the tactics of Jeremy Corbyn and the so-called left and the rest of the so-called left. And the reason why the Guardian is doing that is because of the money. The Guardian gets advertisements from those sources. And the Guardian has affiliated itself in terms of peddling the local councils for more than 2 decades at least. And this has been condemned by the Daily Mail repeatedly, time and again. And the Daily Mail has accused the Guardian of being soft on incompetent, wasteful local councils because of the link with advertising revenue from the councils. That is partly true. The Daily Mail's criticism is only partly true, but the truth is that the Daily Mail itself, whether it has been receiving as much money from advertisements by the local councils or not, the Daily Mail itself is guilty, has been guilty of refusing the truth about Tower Hamlets Council or other councils when it comes to accountability. They jump into a kind of state of frenzy when Tower Hamlets Council has got anything going wrong and they find that the link is with a Muslim mayor or something. That is when they get insanely excited against their council like Tower Hamlets, as also does the rest of Fleet Street, not the Guardian. And the Guardian has played the role of being in denial. And for the 5 calendar years that Luther Roman is in place, in Tower Hamlets Council as the so-called mayor, elected mayor, executive mayor, the Guardian never once published anything objectively truthful, let alone critical of Luther Roman. And their so-called London kind of writer at the time, or during the most of that time, was Dave Hill, who published disastrous and stupid and ignorant and corrupt and pro-corrupt kind of pieces. And the Guardian also was corrupt in its collusion with the so-called Fairness Report. The Fairness Report is a kind of device, it's a propaganda device that was used or has been used by local councils across England to kind of create a veneer of objectivity by saying they're commissioning an investigation into fairness. And the focus, the actual agenda, the de facto agenda, the unwritten agenda, the purpose of every Labour controlled council doing a fairness report was to show how central government cuts to local councils were affecting the delivery, the service that the councils were failing to provide to the local communities. And in the case of Tower Hamlets, where the fairness report was launched by Luther Roman. It wasn't launched by somebody other than a council person, but it was launched by Luther Roman, and the front person that Luther Roman appointed was a guardian kind of linked crook. And this crook then kind of produced a completely predictable, corrupt kind of piece, a report. And in the so-called commission, it was a fairness commission. They committed the crime of kind of combining the membership by recruiting the Guardian's editor's wife, Lindsay McKee, as one of the commission members. So therefore, there were too many coincidences, too many kind of nepotistic and corrupt kind of links between the Guardian and the Tower Hamlets Council, fronted by Luther Roman. So when the report was published, it was totally predictably stupid and ignorant and corrupt and in denial, and it didn't talk at all about the unfairness and the corruption and the criminality being committed during the time of the so-called commission's so-called inquiry by Tower Hamlets Council fronted by Luther Roman. I attended one of the so-called sessions that were supposed to be staged at a Stepney school in Tower Hamlets. By the time I arrived, they had gone. There was really nothing there. And it was a completely false gathering of people. And when I tried to get the details about the terms of reference and the kind of criteria they were using and the extent of the investigation, there was no success at all. There was no answers. And so therefore, the so-called Fairness Commission was totally fabricated and falsified, and the Guardian was a complicit, directly complicit and party to the lying kind of agenda and the lying contents. And let's see if we can find the Fairness Commission, any evidence or any kind of link. The Fairness Commission should not have been kind of treated as uncritically by the Guardian as it did. And they talked about poverty and inequality, but they didn't talk about the poverty and inequality and corruption and criminality caused every day by Tower Hamlets Council. So that is the thing. And it says that the inequality between the east and west of the city dates back to Victorian times. And while Tower Hamlets has seen some improvements, most notably due to investment in education, this gap still persists. So it's not talking about Tower Hamlets Council's role, talking about the Victorian times. So you can see the deflection. And the Tower Hamlets time to act. And it has, these are the members. The chair is Giles Fraser, and the others are listed, and I'm going to read the names as on this document. Dr. Abdul Hai Murshad, K.M. Abu Tahir Chowdhury, Right Reverend Adrian Newman, N.D. Brent, Graham Fisher, Lindsay McKee. Now, Lindsay McKee is the wife of Alan Rabishar, the longtime editor of The Guardian. And she is shown as New Economics Foundation. And Graham Fisher is shown as Chief Executive of Toynbee Hall. Then Mike Smith, and there is a person called Muhammad Habibur Rahman, shown as London Metropolitan University and East London Mosque. The connection really is the East London Mosque, not the Metropolitan University. And there is another person shown as Tower Hamlets Somali Organizations Network called Mustafa Ibrahim. And there is another person called Child Poverty Action Group and Oxford University is Farding. And then a trade union, Unite Trade Union person, Steve Turner. And a person called Sufia Alam, Wapping Women's Center and Muslim Women's Collective. These are names that are totally falsely included there as a display. None of these names, not a single one of these names, has been engaged in any investigation whatsoever about Tower Hamlets or a similar council or organization causing daily deprivation, perpetrating corruption and criminality. And none of them has any evidence or any traceable, accessible, available evidential record of campaigning against council corruption. This list also has this person, K.M. Abu Tahir Chaudhry, who later was announced as the chair of the new thing called Aspire, the party that has been linked with Lutfur Rahman. Now, this was all done before the 2014 mayoral election that was comprehensively denounced by the election commissioner, Richard Morey, who ruled Lutfur Rahman unfit to be in a public post for 5 years. They're saying the Tower Hamlets Fairness Commissioner set up in November 2012 at the instigation of Mayor Lutfur Rahman. That is a lie. It suggests that Lutfur Rahman invented this. It was an original idea by him. That is a complete and utter lie, because these fairness commissions were already happening at and in other labor councils. And this thing says the East End of London has historically been a place where deep-seated social issues have risen to public consciousness and all that kind of garbage. It doesn't talk about the council's direct criminal pro-corruption and corrupt role. It has no mention of corruption in the council. So when the Guardian writes pieces, it has to be seen against that kind of background affiliations. It's not like coming from Mars or Venus, as today's Tar newspaper features Venus, a new star. The Guardian is connected with corrupt dealings and corrupt agendas and corrupt policies. So despite the fact that it has distanced itself later from the Labour Party electorally, when led by or fronted by Jeremy Corbyn, the Guardian has been steeped in corruption locally. And the Daily Mail is as corrupt as the Guardian. The only difference is that the Guardian's considerations come from Guardian's interest, as opposed to the Daily Mail's considerations coming from the Daily Mail's interest. But either way, the Guardian is failing the local electorate, the local community, and the public at large in this country, just as the Daily Mail is betraying and denying the rights and the right to news and information and the truth to the people as a whole, the millions of people, the majority, the many, the many, the many, the many times the many, 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 many times the many, the 99% of the many are being denied the truth by the Daily Mail. And the Guardian is twisting. The Guardian should not be a twisting organ. It should be a straightforward teller of the truth, but it never has been. As I said, when James Cameron, who was a columnist on The Guardian and was also given a spot by the radio, BBC Radio, and he was described as having been married to an Indian woman. Now that's important because he and his peddlers used the fact that he had been married to an Indian woman as a kind of excuse or a justification for his racism, that he could not be racist, that he could not be prejudiced in any way, especially he could not be prejudiced against people of the similar background to his wife. That is absolutely untrue because James Cameron was one of the most racist spewers of racist lies, whose spewing of racist lies for years was excused by the fact that he was linked with the Guardian and that he was married to an Indian woman. So the Guardian has been used by racists in that way and by liars in the way that the Guardian colluded with the Fairness Commission lies fronted by Giles, this man, the Giles Fraser. The two Frasers are featuring in today's Diagnosis. One is Giles Fraser and Fraser Nelson, or the two Nelsons, let's say. Frasers, two Frasers, not Giles, two Frasers. Giles Fraser and Fraser Nelson. But both of them, Giles Fraser is a Brexiteer, despite his invention and fabrication of his identity and background and all the rest of it. He was a Brexiteer. Now, all the liberal kind of pretensions that Giles Fraser kind of introduced himself around were exposed as having been completely untruthfully kind of referred to by Giles Fraser in creating and setting himself up as a personality on the left and the liberal wing of the Church of England. So, I mean, that man is manifestly, demonstrably a kind of unacceptable kind of proponent of liberal values that he otherwise claimed to be a believer in. And when he launched himself, his career, on the back of the protesters that were staging protests against the London St. Paul's Cathedral, he came across as being the good guy, the good vicar, the good clergyman, the clergyman on the side of the protesters, the defenders of climate, the defenders of democracy, defenders of protests and all the rest of it. And yet, he supported Brexit. And Brexit is against all the values of democracy, protests, universality, and the defense of the environment and the opposition to racism. So, the Guardian is exposed once again. And here is the Beaverbrook legacy of lies, the Daily Express, which has reinvented Boris Johnson again. I mean, only one day it failed to put Johnson as the savior of the whole world on the front page. So it has come back and it is saving the whole. He's saying that he's saving, he's the one that is giving the warning. That is absolute lie. Boris Johnson is not giving the warning. Boris Johnson has no option but to admit the failures of his administration, so called, and whatever link, whatever correlation, whatever connection there is between his failures and the coming of the second wave. Whatever the extent, whatever the description, the Express is not saying, but that is the reality. And all the evidence shows that there has been failure and there is persisting to be failures, wide failures, no testing. And whenever they stage some tests, they send people hundreds of miles away, or they say to people to travel hundreds of miles. And when people arrive at some of the addresses or locations, they don't find anything. So it's a massive pandemonium, massive administrative pandemonium for which Johnson should be held personally liable, and he should be prosecuted for running an election about get Brexit done, and he's undoing Brexit while allowing this virus to surge again. It is the obsession with Brexit that has been very centrally, integrally linked with the failure of the pandemonium administration. As Ed Miliband said, that he has misrepresented, falsely appeared to the country at the election. And he painted Brexit as the difference between the wrong things. He said that it's the difference between, Ed Miliband said that it's a difference between right and wrong. And Boris Johnson hid the difference between right and wrong. And he peddled the wrong. And he lied. I mean, the headline words uttered by Ed Miliband should be taken into the detail of what he intended and what he meant and what he referred to and what he relied on, what he based his short statement on. It had to be by definition short. It could not be all the details, but all the aware persons and the people, observers and sufferers of the lies of Johnson-fronted cabal know the details. And as I said yesterday, Johnson capitalized on the Turks, and he exaggerated the phenomenon of the Turks taking over England. That's the message that he and Farage and other intentional liars put to the country, and they said that the Muslims are going to come and take over this country. Now, the Turks are not members of the European Union, and the European Union, as it has been in the last 40 years, has not entertained officially the Turks' application to join the European Union. It has had contracts, but that's not the same thing as in any way treating the Turks' intention or application or interest in a way that can be compared to the similar interest by any non-Muslim, mainly Christian and white European kind of state anywhere, including by Israel. So Boris Johnson lied, and the Labour Party knew that Boris Johnson lied, and the Labour Party, including Corbyn, did not say anything. So those apologists of Jeremy Corbyn who say that he was vilified and he was unfairly targeted and demonized must understand that he was not all of the descriptions of Corbyn's stupidity and ignorance were unfounded or motivated only by malice to do him damage. Corbyn failed, and to this day, there is no evidence, there is no record, there is no accessible evidence of Corbyn setting out an opposition to a racist narrative. None. And Corbyn, you can add Ken Livingston, George Galloway, and the other members of that cabal that actually were given platforms at various times by the communist Morning Star. So, what we are looking at in the context of Fleet Street and Daily Express is to be seen against the evidence of emptiness by the alternative to the Daily Express, let's say. And the alternative doesn't exist. It should exist, but there is no media organ and there is no media narrative. And there is no narrative in the country abroad or as a whole, led by or initiated by or engineered by or created by or initiated by or created by the Labour Party or the opposition to the Conservatives. And there is no pressure. There is no pressure on the Daily Express or on the BBC or on the Sky or anybody in the mainstream so-called from interests, democratic interests in parliament or in the rest of the country to alter the lying agenda, the lying narrative and the lying promotion and propaganda for the lying Boris Johnson and the thieves and crooks and looters. Because this failure, he's saying inevitable. Why is it inevitable? Anything that can be treated, anything that can be prevented to any extent is not ever inevitable. The only time when it becomes inevitable is when the action necessary to prevent it is not taken. And when that action is not taken, the reason has to be explored, investigated. But the Daily Express is not investigating the reason why it is inevitable. If it did, it would say that Boris Johnson is making it inevitable. And then we refer back to the hard immunity that they had as an agenda to let as many people get infected as possible. They invented the reason, the excuse was that if they allowed maximum numbers of people to get infected, then that would be the cure. That is what they said. And in saying that, they allowed the massacres of the care home residents and the thousands of people that should have lived. And that is what they have done. And the Express should not be allowed to say that it is covering the truth. It is absolutely hiding the truth and lying for Johnson. And then it is celebrating on page 2 the victimization by council bailiffs of the people in poverty. That is the real description that it's saying. The council tax bailiffs recover 164 million in arrears crackdown. It is all the way win-win-win for the bailiffs, win-win-win for the fascistic attacks on the poor. That's what the Daily Express is running. Now there are 164 billion pounds being looted under this emergency kind of funding procurement by Rishi Sunak, the UK finance minister, by the hedge funders, his mates and his colleagues, and big business crooks like Philip Green and others. And the Express is not talking about that. 164 million has been extracted from the most poor people, the most low-income people, and that is something that should not be allowed to be celebrated. It should be stopped. And there is nothing compared to the celebration there. There is nothing about the new wave of homelessness and evictions that is coming from Monday. Now, how stupid is the Daily Express? It's a second wave coming soon, says PM, but let's stave off full lockdown. Now, how can they do that? Either they do the lockdown that is enough or necessary to put a significant stop to the spread, or they don't do it, which is what they are saying. They're kind of contradicting even their prescription, the diluted prescription. And then there is this admission. Hospitals are warning that the R rate, that is the reproduction rate of their spreading rate of the virus, the infection, is on the up. They are admitting it. And yet they are saying it's okay not to do the full lockdown. And then there is this misleading, optimistic thing about £95 million to breathe new life into historic high streets. Now that is something that should be treated as a complete, absolute spin. The life would not be there, because the life to be breathed into historic or otherwise kind of town streets and whatever requires, by definition, an overall good health in the economy, and that good health is not there. And there is the admission about the theaters losing business, and Harvey Weinstein being stripped of the CBE. There is a very significant historic kind of admission by this woman that on her record and her evidence deserves to be called moron, Carol Moron. And it's a pun on his name, but it is actually Carol Moron, Carol Malone, but she's an avid Brexiteer and a liar and a racist. And she is as clueless as Boris Banglar's having no clue. Because she has all her comments are clueless and stupid and prejudiced. As she has a column here saying that Boris Banglar's have no clue. And they've got a piece of promotion by Richard and Judy. Now, Richard and Judy is a pair of television presenters in the UK. And they are totally kind of protected from any criticism by anyone. It's like they've got a secret code somewhere where the media cannot criticize them. And the reason why they don't get any criticism is evident in the fact that they've got a column in the lying Daily Express, just like Carol Moron has. So the Daily Express is typically lying and contradicting and peddling Boris Johnson and other liars of the Johnson-fronted cabal. Now, the Daily Mirror is the only one that is saying the number. 56 million people set to for 2-week lockdown. And they are also repeating the word inevitable. They are not saying that it's Johnson's fault. The Daily Mirror is not even saying it's Johnson's fault. They're saying that he is the one who is saying the inevitable. How did they manage to do that? Because they know, based on even their kind of publications and the coverage, so-called, of this is the inside pages of the Daily Mirror. So if the kind of prospect is far worse coming, then how is it that they have missed the link to the sequence of events that make this worse than what it is now already? Okay. So the only time that there is this admission of that is on page 6 by the Daily Mirror. And it says, in a piece by Pipak Krirar, who is the political editor, the headline is Boris set Britain back 3 years in just 3 short days. That is the really accurate kind of headline. Accurate in the sense that that kind of headline should be there all over the place more often, every day. So that's the headline in the piece written by their political editor, Pipa Krier. And what is it referring to exactly? So this is something that is being attributed to so they're putting the kind of credit to Lisa Nandi and saying Brits are sick and tired of divisions over Brexit after Boris Johnson's attempt to reopen old wounds, according to the Shadow Foreign Secretary. Lisa Nandi accused the Prime Minister of setting back the country's global reputation with plans which would break international law. She warned that the public was very, very scared about a second coronavirus wave and wants the government to focus on controlling the COVID. Now, the government is allowing lack of treatment and lack of protection and lack of kind of action that are needed to address the virus, to stop it, and to deal with it, and to create a suitable public health service environment that is fit for the country and fit for the health of the country. And at every stage, they are contradicting, and they're failing, and they're neglecting, and they're lying, and they're in denial. So the Daily Mirror is obviously doing the kind of token kind of support for the Labour Party and token opposition to the Conservatives. And they're celebrating the British troops' show of force in Ukraine against Putin and that kind of thing. There is no other news, and there is nothing in the Mirror, there is nothing in the Daily Guardian in comparison with the Daily Mail or the Sun or the Star or the Boris Graph. Nothing about what is going on in the local area, the local communities. And there is no accounting of the failures of the hospitals and the other agencies, the care agencies, so-called, the behavior of the care homes and the controllers and the businesses that are raking in hundreds of millions under the cover of business of care homes, running care homes, controlling care homes. So there has never been in British media any accounting of any of these. Take that point. There has never been. So what they do is they do the kind of what is known as the knee-jerk kind of reporting. When there is something happening at the very last moment, they do that. And they shriek and they scream and they cry and they shout. And they, the so-called newspapers, are at the front of the queue shouting blame at X, Y, and Z. What we are saying and what is needed by the country is identifying those who are responsible. If the evidence leads to the people responsible, then identify them, name them, shame them, hold them to account, and oust them from the posts, and hold them to account also by making them pay back, because hundreds of millions of pounds, hundreds of millions of public pounds in the money in the name of the public and from the public sort of source are given to organized criminal gangs operating various businesses in and in the neighborhood of the so-called health service. And it is already happening. It has been happening for decades. And when, like the likes of Alan Milburn were health secretary, they colluded with the big business agenda. So the Labour Party has not been in power, while in power, providing a model that should have been provided, model of administration, model of supporting the idea of the health service with the active, rigorous presence of the daily accountability by the health service providers, the decision makers. There has to be a parallel organization and a platform to hold the decision makers to account every single day about every single decision they make affecting people's lives and welfare and care. That is what is needed. This is a part of the exclusive diagnostic finding and investigation you are watching here on the Kudilar television channel on Saturday, the 19th of September, 2020. And there is this other protection for Boris Johnson and the Daily Mail. The Daily Mail is saying that Rishi Sunak, the UK finance minister, is asking Boris Johnson not to go too far with the kind of lockdown. Now that shows the complete dishonesty on the part of the Daily Mail. It should not be serving as Boris Johnson's shield, and it should not be targeting Rishi Sunak or whoever. It should be talking about the evidence. That's where its duties lie, to tell the readers of the actual evidence on the grounds. When there is a crisis, so-called in the rest of the world, British media, mainstream media like the Daily Express and others, and the Daily Mail, Express is reducing its kind of coverage of the world increasingly to the point of zero. But normally the standard has been with the likes of the Daily Tory Boris Graf. Boris Graf has a history kind of going back decades, 100 years or so, when the Oberon War, his father wrote the book Scoop. And that scoop was based on an Eritrean kind of assignment or something. So they had the international kind of assignments and reporters, the papers. Not anymore. And if they had been covering something that wasn't happening in this country, but only in the particular country, like a pandemic in another country, then they would be giving the facts, or they would be forced to give the facts rather than covering up for one party or another, or covering up the whole thing altogether. But as the pandemic is happening inside the country, the Daily Mail is being persistently dishonest, and it's hiding the extent of the evidence of the failures by the Johnson fronted cabal. Now, that is affecting people's lives. It's not a kind of incidental, one off act of bias against the Labour Party. It is denying people their life saving kind of care and treatment and protection. And the Daily Mail should be talking about, just like the earlier this morning, the Sky News ran a piece about Yemen. And Sky News' piece, the package, was followed by a person from Yemen or with the Yemeni kind of connections, speaking from Bromwich in near Birmingham. Now, that person said that the people in Yemen, showed in Yemen, were in denial about the connections and the causes of the virus, because as shown, there were 30% rate, the number of percentage of people was 30% as compared to 7% elsewhere, particularly. Now, so therefore, it was completely, overwhelmingly kind of uncared for or unprepared and unconcerned. That is the image of the people that came across in that package. And so therefore the attitude that the Sky News took was critical of the people who were denying. As the man from Bromwich said, they were in denial. If that is the case, then why is it that the Sky News and the Daily Mail and others are not saying the same thing about the Johnson administration and the cabal of Johnson appointed crooks and criminals fleecing the public purse? But they've got this two-page spread about the Mail protecting brave translators in Afghanistan. Now, the Daily Mail is corrupt because it's only talking about the translators. What about the other people? And it is openly corrupt and racist and imperialistic. Why not talk about the other victims of the wars in Afghanistan? That shows the Daily Mail only recognizes people who are openly complicit with and are serving the British armed forces, which may need serving, but that should not be the only thing that they should be basing their judgment and assessment, evaluation and recognition of these people on. And the Daily Mail has got an editorial on that one. And they're talking about Andrew Marr, they're introducing Andrew Marr to the readers as a new columnist from the BBC. That they hate the BBC, the idea of a public service broadcast, but they have been colluding with John Humphreys for years. And now they're introducing Andrew Marr, but it's nothing to do with the media's role, but it's talking about something else. And they're continuing with the sex-mad blonde and the very dangerous to know. See, Richard Kay and Andrew Pierce are writing this piece about the wife of Hugo Swear. And are calling her a sex-mad blonde who is dangerous to know, too dangerous to know. The sex-mad blonde, only because she has been kind of revealing sub-pornographic or even pornographic stuff about the Tories, including Michael Gove, who is the kind of linked to Andrew Pierce and the Times and the Murdoch, and it is suggested that there is this hidden expectation that if Boris Johnson is replaced, they would probably push Gove to replace him. That is the line, and that is the reason why they are having a go at this sex mad blonde who is very dangerous to know because she is telling too many of their secrets. Sex related, but that is their secrets, and that embarrasses them. That is what they're doing. They're not reviewing Sasha Swire and her book objectively. And they're not talking about the things that she left out, things like the political corruption, the crimes, and the kind of conspiracies they hatched all the while they're doing the sexual kind of advances and so on. So therefore, it's a completely dishonest kind of exercise by her and by the Daily Mail pretending to be opposing and criticizing her book. And there is this 2-page spread continuing. Sue Reed. Sue Reed is the name on the Daily Mail's groups, kind of publications, Daily Mail and the Mail on Sunday, and they've got the kind of syndication connection with other publications that buy the outfit's copy, and Sue Reed is sold in terms of copy, and she is and has been the most kind of consistent or persistent anti-migrant, racist kind of reporter who apparently does in-depth pieces, and they run the pieces, the Mail group. No other title does that. It's the Mail group that does that. And I've got this 2-page spread about the indigenous white people on the coasts of Kent reacting to migrants. And it says to the public, to the readers, you see the drama in the news. We are living with it every day, as if the migrants are some kind of disease. That is how they are kind of painting the migrants. What happens after the migrant boats land here daily? A disquieting report from the villages on the front line lays bare frustrations of locals who feel forgotten. I mean, these are human beings, but they are not treating them as human beings. They are painting the migrants, very small numbers of them land anyway, or are allowed to land in this country anyway, as some kind of disease. So that's the sickness of the Daily Mail. And the rest of the Daily Mail is full of sick-making lies and inventions and promotions of the likes of the mass murderer Nielsen. And there is a column again by Amanda Platel. Platel is the Australian racist who has been given a regular spot by the Daily Mail on Saturdays. And the Times is doing the same thing with the kind of elevation of Boris Johnson to the protective kind of space of PM, and ascribing to him, that is giving credit to him for no justification whatsoever, that he is warning the country to expect a second wave of the virus, prepare for. His government is unprepared, and he is asking the country to prepare. So we shall be continuing in the next edition. This is 11 minutes to 10 GMT in the morning of Saturday, the 19th of September 2020.